Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us at the Meadows Museum for Learning at Lunch. My name is Ann Kinseth, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Meadows Museum. And I'm very happy to be able to spend the next 30 to 45 minutes with all of you. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce curatorial assistant at the Meadows Museum, which is a post she's filled since 2011. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degrees in both art history and Spanish from SMU and a master's degree in art history from Hunter College in New York. During her time at the Meadows, DeMaria has curated several exhibitions, including Dali, Poetics of the Small, 1929 to 1936, Salvador Dali, an early surrealist masterpiece, and Human/Nature, the Ridiculous and Sublime, recent works by John Alexander. Additionally, DeMaria oversees our Moss Chumley Award, and I am happy to now turn the program over to her.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's my pleasure to get to spend a little bit of time speaking with Bernardo Vallarino today, who is our 2020 Moss Chumley recipient. So just to give a little bit of background first about the Moss Chumley Award for anyone that may not be familiar with it, each year the Meadows Museum presents this award to an outstanding North Texas artist who has exhibited professionally for at least 10 years and also has established a proven track record as a community advocate for the visual arts in North Texas. The award is given in memory of Frank Moss and Jim Chumley, who were two Dallas art dealers who made their own outstanding contributions to the visual arts in North Texas during the 1980s. Together, Moss and Chumley operated the Nimbus Gallery from 1980 to 87 and the Moss Chumley Gallery from 1986 to 1989. And their objective was really to highlight the work of new artists. A panel of members from the Dallas art community is assembled each year to evaluate the submissions that we receive for the award. And I just wanted to recognize the members of this year's panel who were responsible for selecting Bernardo as the recipient. They were Lee Arnold, who is the associate curator at the Nasher Sculpture Center, and Len Hart, who is the collections manager here at the Meadows Museum, David Sedman, who is an associate professor of film and media arts and the 2019-2020 interim chair of the art department at the Meadows School of Art here at SMU. Carolyn Sorter, who was the 2019 Moss Chumley recipient, and myself. And we were thrilled to recognize Bernardo for his achievements in his artistic practice thus far. Bernardo is a Colombian American mixed media sculptor and installation artist who is interested in geopolitical issues of violence and human suffering. His works reflect his observations on the hypocrisy he perceives that exists between the rhetoric of human life and the violent behavior of humanity. He finds inspiration in history, the media, his personal experiences, and his child-acquired interest in insects and etymology. Vallarino graduated with a BFA in sculpture from Texas Christian University and an MFA from Texas Women's University. So welcome, Bernardo. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, and at the same time, welcome to my studio. It's an honor to have been the recipient for this year's Moss Chumley Award, and thank you for the Meadows for allowing me to have this conversation today, and everybody here who is joining us. I appreciate you all taking time of your day to listen to this conversation and about my work.
Yeah, so I think we'll just, I have a few questions for you, Bernardo, just to kind of get into a little bit of your work and your practice. And then as Anne mentioned, we'll open it up in a little bit to questions from the group. Anything maybe that you're already wondering that it's not covered or anything that pops up during this conversation, please feel free. This is meant to be an informal, friendly conversation among all of us. So we welcome your participation. But Bernardo, I wanted to start by asking, because you just recently had an installation at the Nasher Sculpture Center. It was part of it's a new program that they're doing it's called
National
Nash Republic. Yes, and you were the inaugural installation, I believe, for this. It's a year-long initiative that they're doing, and it's a gallery space that's in the place of where their museum store typically is. So it's and I mention that because it's windows out onto the street, right? So people from the sidewalk can see you. Even when the museum isn't open, your installation was fully on view. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that project.
Well, it was an honor to begin with, just to be chosen for that series, and it was a kind of a big deal to be the first one because you really don't know what to expect, and it was a really good experience. Because I was the first one right off the bat, the conversation with the Nasher was about some of the pieces that installations that I already had produced, and if you follow my artwork, you know that I do have quite a bit of installations. Even though my studio is kind of small, I do produce a lot of large work that comes out of the studio. And Pedacitos de Paz just happened to be a work that they found really interesting because it is an installation that continues to grow, that is not static in time of sorts, and also possibly because of the fact that it has some social commentary. So and a few other things that came about on regards to what they asked me to do with the show. So with the proposal, we added the video, which shows some of my the videos of me doing the ribbons in the past, and then also the presentations where I actually was there and actually did some ribbons in the museum. For those of you who had not seen the installation, it's actually a very simple installation. It's a very small desk with a large magnifying glass that has light around it, and a whole bunch of little ribbons, the ones that you would use for commemoration, like for on behalf of cancer patients, or on behalf to all kinds of different things. So anyway, so it's the one that you kind of do one loop around, and then that's it, right? So that's basically what the installation is. And I have an image of the work so you can get an idea how many ribbons there were, if I may. I'm going to share the screen. Bear with me for a second. All right. So it's funny. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so here's the Instagram account, and this is all ribbons. So this is what the installation looked like.
Do you know how many ribbons total you had there?
So it's funny. I have to do it mathematically, because when I first started, there weren't that many. I mean, there were a bunch, but there weren't that many. And throughout the years, as different massacres and things of that nature have happened, I continue to add to the project, to the installation. And like I was saying, mathematically, it comes to about 65,000 right now in total. I mean, they come in spools like this one's in 100 yards, and so that's how I do it.
So to clarify, you are physically making all of these they're ribbons that then you're folding and pinning yourself.
Yes, exactly. And at the beginning, I didn't intended it for it to be an ongoing project. So I did not intended it for it to be a piece that had a what you call it, like I create them, like people see me doing that kind of thing. But it has evolved into that. So here's a couple of examples of it. This is me at the Nasher creating some of the actual ribbons at 3 different performances. So.
And so you were at the Nasher 3 different times you were there physically making them. Mm-hmm. For how long did you spend each time?
About 2 hours. About 2 hours. That's just long enough for people to get the idea, for there to be enough ribbons to where you start seeing the ribbons kind of collapsing on their own weight from the desk into the ground. Also, there's a meditative process in my mind when I'm creating them, and especially when I get kind of past half an hour making these things. So since I had the platform of the Nasher, I wanted to kind of showcase really what the whole project was about. And so the 2 hours was perfect. After 2 hours, my back starts hurting from sitting there and this little things over and over again.
And it's a project, I mean, it's an ongoing project. Am I correct that I believe I read it started in 2016 was the first kind of the beginning, the conception of this project? And then is it something that, is it based kind of like on the opportunity to install it, or are you maybe making the ribbons kind of just on an ongoing basis as these things happen?
Correct. It's on an ongoing basis. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, I did not intend it for it to be like that. I originally did the work because I was frustrated with this plethora of wishes, of thoughts and prayers that happen right after every, you know, massacre here in the States, you know, and stuff like that. And that's why I created the ribbons. Each one of them represents a thought or a prayer or a wish of well-being without any action. Anyways, after the first iteration, then more of those type of events happen. And I thought I cannot just stop doing that. So I started doing some in my studio, and eventually I thought, well, I better start recording, you know, this creation just as a way of keeping track of them. And then obviously with social media, I started uploading them and things like that. And that's how that project in some way took its own life. And now I make ribbons every time there's something major. Massacres, and not just in the United States. I've done also for different, you know, countries and different, you know, other type of events.
And it does, I mean, I was thinking, you said the word meditative as you're making those ribbons, and I was thinking the same thing, that it must be, you know, the idea behind it is that there are thoughts and prayers, and that's something that you're thinking about, the events that have caused you to make these ribbons. But I know you mentioned that it was kind of a new thing to then be part of the installation yourself at the Nasher and to put yourself in the window for periods of time. What made you, I mean, was it just in an effort to kind of connect with viewers, or what made you kind of add that element of performance to that installation?
I had shown the performances of me here at home or in my studio making them, and it just seemed natural to want to show the process as well at the museum. And when I approached them with the idea of doing them, they really were open to it. So it honestly very organic. It was not really intended for a specific reason. And when it comes to work like mine, where it's conceptually based, where it's charged with so many social elements and things like that, it is hard for people to kind of understand the approach to the work, you know, with its materials and things like that. And I think given the opportunity for people to see how my reverence to the material, to the process, it hopefully adds much more solidity to the piece. So that was part of the, you know, a little part of the reason why.
Well, I guess on that note, I would love to have you kind of show some images and talk through a few of your other works, because a lot of your works, and I think as we see in Pedacitos de Paz that was at the Nasher, there's these common through lines. You know, the themes that you're looking at are human suffering and violence that humans do unto others. But then there's also these formal elements that I think we see that get carried through in a lot of your installations of plurality, and kind of the scale, the repetition. And so I would be curious if you could kind of walk through maybe a couple of your other projects, and just kind of show us how that plays out in other pieces.
Cool. Let me wasn't completely prepared on that, but I can show you. That's a good thing of let me go ahead and share the screen so that people just doesn't see me playing with the screen, but rather see what I'm doing. So one of the things that I like, this one, for example, right? This is an installation that I did, that I've done twice, and it's 7 million plus SOSs printed on paper. and actually there's about 17 boxes, and the repetition in there is important, because it gives a sense of the magnitude of the numbers that I'm talking about. And each SOS represents in this case, a refugee from 2018, and there's over 7 million. So in this case, I wanted to kind of showcase the numbers. Instead of being so generic, I wanted to be much more specific. Kind of each one of those numbers represents an individual, and when you have it in boxes and things like that, becomes in your face. It makes you realize what it is. And when you're talking about repetition and scale, and a lot of the elements that you see in a lot of my work has to do, as you mentioned at the opening, with my curiosity with insects. So and if you start looking at my work, you'll see that, you know, a lot of things tend to be very small in some cases, or you'll see actual insects in the work, like with this ones, with the tributes. So you will see a lot of insects in my work, and throughout the years, I've created this metaphorical connection between the way we interact with insects, the same way in some ways that we interact with one another. So that lack of empathy and sympathy, in which, you know, we kill an insect just because it's around us or it's bugging us, kind of applying that to our own personal human to human interactivity. Plus they are foreign to us, and there's a whole bunch of things that have allowed me to express a lot of my thoughts and a lot of my frustrations with social causes that insects allow me to express it, right? So the plurality comes definitely from that, from seeing a whole bunch of ants coming out of a mountain, the colors, textures. It's amazing how much I've been able to pull from those little guys throughout the years to create hopefully some interesting visual works and installations.
So I'm curious to know a little bit more about your childhood interest in insects. Was it just you were fascinated by them, or where did that start to get to it become something that you can use almost as like a parallel for your art practice?
Yeah, and it's completely a kind of an underline throughout my full career. It's settled throughout the whole thing, and it originally started. I mean, living in Colombia in South America, you're exposed to biodiversity, and insects can get pretty large down there. And as a kid, just going out in the forest and collecting insects and seeing them and interacting with them was just something that was just fascinating. And when I started working or creating artworks in my undergrad at TCU, for some reason, when I created artworks that had insects in it, I tended to put a lot more, not attention, but there was something about it, and I paid more attention to that connectivity, and why I was so interested on that and on them. They are colorful. They are physically intricate. They are they come all kinds of different sizes and different all kinds of different things. That when it comes to aesthetics, there's just a lot in there. So sooner or later, I started just creating artworks that had a lot of insects. And behind me in my wall, there's some of that work from my undergraduate periods, and then they just moved on to creating a connectivity. Originally was more directly like military insect and just kind of that relationship, but obviously as I grew artistically and understanding more my artistic vocabulary, then those ideas evolved into what we have today, which is that metaphor of human interactivity.
Well, I'm wondering, you mentioned the kind of the military and that direct correlation, and I'm wondering because I think of one of your installations, and I'm sorry, I can't think of what it's called, but it has like little, I think they're bronze, like they look like little military figures, and you have them installed so that I think you use a magnifying lens, and I know there's an image with like a knife in the wall holding up one of these figures. I'm wondering if you want to share any of those images or, kind of
Sure,
show
sure.
that, how that kind of like that beginning to see where it's ended up now.
Yeah, correct. And give me a second. I'm trying to find myself here. Excellent. So now I can share this here. So let me go to my website. So this is an human, for example. This body of work, I wanted to bring forth a little bit more of the emotional pain through showing pain in some ways. So like this one's right here, as you can see, they are humanoid forms, but then there is this, butterfly shadows behind them, and the light hits the glass, and then you can see kind of the full insect in some ways, right? In the shadow underneath. Then you have this little guys as well. This one's the labels has the name of a war, and I started in year 0, and each one of them is a specimen or one possible individual from that war. And you don't see the full wall here, but it's about 40 feet.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh. And then you have one of each in there. And so you could imagine that for each war, there's thousands, and this is just kind of one specimen of that. Then this one's as well. So it gives you an idea of that correlation between militarism and the insects and how I'm able to converge them. I've also, even earlier before this, I had, comparisons to tanks, to helicopters, and it's in a much more settled way, or much more direct way. I mean, and obviously nowadays it's much more settled. It's much more settled.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting to see that, that kind of growth or that transition. Like I said, when you're talking about it, that connection to the insects, I think I understand it very clearly looking at that specific installation.
Yeah, and I mean, and they still appear periodically, right? So they still show themselves, like the actual forms of the figures of the shapes, I mean, of the insects. But most of it right now, it's like you said, it's more about plurality. It's much more about scale, and not those elements that I've kind of pulled from their biologies and brought them into the conversation about social issues.
Well, and I think, was that a flag that you just held up? That's a work from this past year, I think, because I wanted to ask you also about kind of how this year of 2020 and everything that has been happening between the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, obviously it's a lot to process.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm curious, how that plays into your work, knowing, the themes that you're thinking about, how this past year has come to play in your work.
Yeah. The way I make work, it's very slow. I put a lot of things in my sketchbooks, and then they simmer in there, and eventually they become something. For me, there has to be a very specific reason, and I really like to study it, because since my work deals with what I feel is people's real lives and their plights, then it has to be a level of respect, both to the material, the content, and all of those things. So I very seldom trigger artwork right off the bat without really giving it a lot of time or thought. However, with 2020, with all these social issues happening under the umbrella of a pandemic, people are looking at you as a social artist and going, okay, what are you going to do? So they're expecting you to create artwork. And what I ended up doing is I did have some work that it was in my sketchbooks, and I was able to come up with some different works that have come out of this pandemic year. And some of them are right here on the opening of my website. So 3 of them are as what I call the tributes, and there are 3 flags, and I utilized faux money for it, and they were all 3 responses to different things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. One of them had to do with this idea that the lives of the elderly were disposable, comparatively speaking, to the benefit of the economy. And as a Colombian, for us, the elderly is people we look up to. We protect them. They live with us. So it was very shocking to hear that. So that was one of those things that kind of pushed me into looking at the kind of the hypocrisy between, once again, what the things we like to think that we do, which is, we believe in the purity of life and, all those things, versus the things that we actually end up doing. So I created this tribute right here, and it's called Tribute to Grandma's Sacrifice. So it looks like an American flag. It's meant to look like an American flag, but then it has little butterflies instead of stars. And that's connected to my own metaphorical connection to butterflies, and where I believe that the butterflies, the moment between the time you allow your body to die and the moment you die, rather than kind of the more conceptual, what most people think, which is after death. So anyway, so adding that element in this one, then as things progressed socially, then we had individuals who were going into government buildings with guns, and I figured, they were calling them patriots, and that once again was a very kind of contradictory thought in my mind, to have people who would say that they believe in the purity of life and things like that, yet they wouldn't wear a mask, kind of thing, and we're willing to be militaristic about it. So that's where the second one came about, and this one's got little ants on the flag. And lastly, the other flag came soon after that. I was appalled by the video of the gentleman. I always forget his name. He was murdered basically in video, and by two gunmen. So these two gunmen come out of the car as he's jogging, and they killed him. To me, that was just horrific, and it's a horrific event. So I decided to push the boundaries with symbology and actually use the swastika, and give it to 2020 with a big wasp, the hornets, right? Murder hornets. So I did a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing with this one, and I called it a tribute to the murder wasp, and obviously it's capital ASP, to make the connection between the social injustice that we have regarding race right now under the umbrella of the pandemic. So not only do we have a pandemic of, and that's kind of the tone of this, is not, we only have a pandemic of a real pandemic, but also a pandemic of association, racism, and a few other things that are as appalling and bad as an actual pandemic. This one's also another flag, obviously, and that comes from all their social issues regarding race that we had, and kind of juxtaposition between blue lives and the flag behind. I think it's not blue lives. Is it blue lives?
Blue lives for police. Blue lives
exactly,
for blue, yeah.
exactly. Versus the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of put them together and allowing a conversation about justice, right? And then the last one is this one, and this ones were interesting. I tend to be very politically neutral, well, not completely neutral, but tend to kind of eliminate a lot of the politics into it, so that people are not just hang on the politics. But this one, as a Hispanic, I use a lot of Goya products, and because of my own personal beliefs regarding what's going on regarding immigration and the poor way that we're treating immigrants in the border, when we're supposed to be Catholics and Christians and so forth. I felt betrayed as a Hispanic by the actions of the president of Goya. And it's not just Goya. I mean, I think many other products around the world are you can use your money as a way of voting, and you have to be mindful as in society and where your money is going, just like where your food is coming from, but also where your money is going to. And so I use, because I'm Hispanic and because I use Goya products, and with what happened, I merged both of those things. I merged the children behind the cages, and then Goya kind of politically or yeah, for political reasons, kind of doing what they did. So I don't get too political. I don't want to. So anyway, so that's where they came.
So are those little figures of children that we're seeing in the cans?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. They're very hard to photograph. So
yeah.
Yeah, so that one. I think there's another image. Let me see, from somebody that took. Let's see, on Facebook. There it is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So this one you can probably see a little bit better, but yeah, they're human figures inside there.
Well, I guess before we open it up to any questions from everyone here with us today, I wanted to ask one more question. I mean, I could ask a lot more questions. We could do this for another hour, but for the sake of the program, I'm just curious to hear a little bit about kind of artists that inspire you, or artists that you're looking at, or artists on your Instagram page that you're following. Just a couple artists that that you're inspired by.
Sure. So classically, if I may even say classically, Salvador Dali has always been a huge inspiration of mine. Has been around. I absolutely love the last exhibition that you guys had of Dali with the small
Thank
works.
you.
I thought that was really, really cool. Actually inspired so much that I'm doing something for a show pretty soon that kind of
very cool.
resembles his work. And so I love the surrealist. I do believe that we live in a surreal world, and where our reality is the surrealism, because we all kind of have rose-colored glasses, and we like to wash things off instead of seeing the reality. So Dali is one of those that I do see classically. Contemporarily speaking, I love Ai Weiwei's work. Him and we make kind of work in the same realm, and it's funny because I started kind of gravitating towards a specific topic, and before I know it, he's got something worldwide that relates exactly to what I'm trying to do here locally. Doris Salcedo is another artist. She's also from Colombia. I think we do similar work, with the difference that Doris Salcedo work, it's much more about remembering and the past, and making sure that we are mourning, versus mine, which is much more a question of what are you doing, kind of question yourself, do something about it, etc. And another artist that I like a lot is Damien Hurst. A lot of people are very much put by his work, but I do find that artists, and I would say like myself, who dwell into this really dark areas of humanity, there's elements that there's beauty in things, as like death and things like that, and most people don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about this. We really don't. So artists like him kind of helps me with thinking that I'm kind of doing the right thing. So those are kind of the three contemporary artists that I pay attention to. Catalan, I also like his humor, and some of my works tend to have a little bit of tongue-in-cheek type stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bernardo. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you and get to learn a little bit more about your practice. I think Anne will let us know if there's any questions in the chat. And also, again, we welcome any of you, if you're brave and want to turn on your video and raise your hand, or you actually don't even need to turn on your video. If you can just unmute yourselves and ask a question if any of you want to ask directly something to Bernardo.
Great. Well, thank you both to Bernardo and to Shelley for facilitating this conversation. We already have 2 questions in the chat box. So for those of you still formulating your questions, you still have time. The first question comes from Jean Felstead, and it's a big question. Jean kind of notes that right now there's a lot being written about the role of art and the role of museums. And she is wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of how you define art. What is art?
Good question. And I normally don't get into talking about that too much, gets me in trouble. I believe that art is the physical the physical appearance of an idea. Art is not so much the object, but rather this constant growth of a person's thoughts and ideas. We are just lucky enough that somebody has the skills and the ability to bring those ideas into a production and that we can see them, right? So to me, that's what art is that ongoing concept and or driven concepts and ideas that evolve throughout a person's career, an artist's career. And then we, like I said, we're just kind of happy to be able to see the physical manifestations of that, which is what we call art too. So anyway,
I actually have a little bit of a follow-up to that. I'm wondering how you see the viewer, kind of what their role is in the process then.
Well, education is a big part of being able to experience art. So the viewer has to allow themselves to question, but also in some ways learn about what it's about. We tend to judge. I mean, I'm not going to quote Matisse, but we judge things right off the bat. And in order for you to understand a piece of artwork, you need to understand the artist in some ways. You need to understand their body of work, the past of where that's coming from and where it's going to, and also the connectivity that exists with other artworks or with other periods. So the moment you start understanding those connections as an art viewer, the more beautiful the artwork becomes, whether it's beautiful visually or beautiful within the context of it. So the viewer has two options. It could be passive and then just kind of check things that they see, or they can be active and be part of art and really do what it takes, which is to understand it in order to evolve it. I mean, we do it with everything else. So we do it with religion, we do it with everything else around our lives. So why not art? So
thank you. So we have two more questions currently. This one comes from Penelope Bisbee, and it came when you were talking about the flags. And she, first of all, is just thankful. She's feeling like the work is very powerful and it challenges the viewer. But she's curious what kind of response you've gotten from the flags.
Well, thank you, everybody, for the questions to begin with. But disappointing in some ways. There was a pushback at the beginning, questioning why the use of strong symbols like a swastika, and there's sometimes those things just need to be said, and I don't take it lightly. I am very mindful of every single element in my artwork, and I make sure that when I use symbols, that I study that symbol, because that symbol has a history of in itself, and not only history, but a social content as well in the period in where we're seeing that symbol. So it was disappointing because I believe that our culture is much more advanced. Obviously, the last 4 years have shown us that not really. But within the context of the art world, I thought that I wasn't going to get as much pushback from it, and I do. Every time I put it on shows to be shown, like to judges and stuff like that, they normally ask the other two flags, but not the one with the swastikas. So there's a lot of pushback on the content of that work specifically. The other two flags, a lot more subtle. And they're much more open to interpretation. So there people are, I think in general, are much more okay with that. But it is what it is, and I've never made artwork for anything other than what my thoughts are. So I hope I answered the question.
That's great. We actually have someone that would like to ask the question themselves.
Hello, thank you so much, Bernardo Vallarino, for your insightful talk and your amazing work. I'm also working at the Meadows Museum. I'm a curatorial fellow here. And I'm very interested in more colonial Latin American art and Spanish. But one interest of mine when I went to Colombia was going to the Gold Museum, the Museo del Oro. And Colombia's pre-Hispanic past, and the small figurines that are gold that you see in the Museo del Oro. And I was wondering if this influenced the small figurines that feature in your work.
Not so much, honestly, the size, but the use of metals. That it comes from that a little bit. So, which I've never had anybody made that connection. So, it's I layer so many things, and some things I just never mentioned because they are just kind of the gold nuggets of an artist's work, and I'm very glad you kind of saw that. The figurine size do come from taking a human and bringing it down to the size of an insect, so we can we can disassociate ourselves from that object, even though it's human form, right? So that's where that scale comes from that my idea of connecting this association with an insect with a human form. But using gold a lot in my artwork, and using, like you saw the last painting, this one right here, a lot of gold, right? And when I use bronze, this does come from the Colombian background.
Very insightful. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimmy.
Well, we are actually at time, so I want to first thank all of you who spent your lunch hour with us. I'd like to thank again Shelley DeMaria. And of course, I would like to thank Bernardo for joining us for this conversation, and offer another congratulations on being our current Moss Chumley Award winner. So thank you all very much. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday as well as a weekend. We do have other programs coming up this year, and a whole new dazzling docket of programs that will be released in the spring. So we hope to see you for more of our online programming at the Meadows Museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Shelley. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.